It is an honor for me to participate in this important event, where the problems of the present and the future prospects for Western democracies are discussed. We Venezuelans can say few things on this regard. We have experienced the consequence of two major authoritarian regressions over the last century. The most recent began in 1990s and continues to this day. It has dismantled our democracy institutions, ruined our economy, led to exodus of a third of our population, and separated our families. Our life could have been completely different if the democratic normality we had become accustomed to over the previous 20 years had been maintained. But for that to happen, the majority of our population would have to recognize early on the most worrying signs that our democracy was in danger. At the end of the last century, our welfare state, which had been supported by decades of substantial oil revenues, was showing significant signs of exhaustion. Our population was growing much faster than our productivity. When the world changed and trade borders opened up, our products became less competitive. The state could no longer subsidize our production as it had done before, nor it could effectively finance the social services that had attracted immigrants from neighboring countries, driving for poverty, dictatorship, and armed conflict. Popular discontent grew, and enemies of democracy took advantage of this situation to challenge our institutions. Following social unrest, military conspirators staged two coups d'etat. They failed, but they weakened our democratic regime. And that failed to achieve what they failed to achieve by force, they later achieved through the ballot box. Almost 27 years have passed since that moment when citizens voted for an option that ultimately destroyed the constitutional order, thus violating all citizens' rights. This is why when we see similar process taking place in other parts of the world today, we Venezuelans often say that we come from the future. It's much easier to lose democracy than to regain it. Over the last quarter of century, we Democrats in Venezuela have devoted enormous effort to this task. We have exhausted all the means provided by our Constitution and law to ensure the people's sovereignty is restored in our institutions. 15 months ago, the climax of this struggle was reached when Venezuelan Democrats defeated the regime that specialized in rigging elections. A huge citizen movement was organized to prevent further fraud. On that memorable day, more than 1 million of citizens performed a specific task to protect the vote and succeeded. The proof of our victories lies in the tally sheets that now reside in the vaults of the Central Bank of Panama and being digitalized for the whole world to scrutinize. However, we have been forced to confront an authoritarian regime that is increasingly moving away from politics into criminality. A narco-terrorist regime that oppose our votes with guns. A criminal autocracy whose leaders currently being tried for crimes against humanity at the International Crime Court in The Hague. You are all aware for our current situation, and based on, I would like to conclude my speech pointing some lessons that we Venezuelans have been able to learn in recent years with regard to democracy. The first lesson teaches that conquest of freedom and democracy is never definitive. It can never be taken for granted. On the contrary, both are precarious assets that we must nurture and exercise day after day if we don't want to lose them to populist autocrats. The second lesson can draw from the Venezuelan case is that democracies today tend to fall by much less violent means than in the past. They tend to fall in the ballot box invoking the idea that democracy consists exclusively on the rule of the circumstantial majority, thus ignoring all the conquests of classical political liberalism. The third point I would like to make is that the deterioration of democracy is now often linked to the dangerous relationship between politics and organized crime. Dirty money requires the rule of law to be weakened, so it is particularly interested in undermining democratic institutions. Fourth, and finally, we Venezuelans have found that unconventional threats are increasingly difficult to tackle with the conventional method. Faced with autocrats who know how to exploit the tools of a free society for their own illicit goals. We Democrats must learn how to mobilize citizens on a massive scale by renewing our political abilities. In Venezuela, the fundamental reality explains our struggle is that the regime declared war on its citizens years ago, and Venezuela has resisted. Today, the international community takes a firm step toward denouncing the so-called cartel of sons and imposing a military and diplomatic siege on a criminal regime. Between 2014 and 2019, 269 Venezuelans were killed in the streets or under torture. We represent the end of that war. We are peace. As we legitimate government of peace and order, we will restore Venezuela by ending the violence and chaos. We guarantee all Venezuelans respect and protection under the rule of law. This is what we Venezuelans have done with support of our Nobel Prize winner, Maria Corina Machado, who have overcome every obstacle that the tyranny has placed between us and freedom. With the help of our allies, we will regain it very soon. You count on it. Thank you for your attention.